Today is September 30th. It's the 274th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. On this day in 1968, the American commercial airplane manufacturer Boeing rolls out the first 747 jumbo jet. It's a prototype they show off to the press and public for the first time outside their Everett, Washington factory. And the 747 is unlike any airplane ever seen. It has a distinct look from its very first day, the large bulge on top of the fuselage, its sheer size, its swept-back wings not seen on jets of this size up to this point, its 18 wheels, and its engines mounted forward of the wings on nacelles. Design work on the 747 starts in 1965. One of Boeing's biggest customers, Pan Am, is looking for a much larger jet to add to their fleet, something twice the size of the 707, which they already use extensively. And they specifically request a double-deck fuselage. Pan Am is one of Boeing's more important clients. They're also kind of a pain in the backside to work with. Pan Am is exceptionally demanding, often playing Boeing off of other manufacturers, placing an order with Boeing, but then a much larger order with the competition to put the pressure on Boeing to deliver first. And Pan Am's engineers have stringent capacity and performance guarantees that must be met to fulfill the contract. So it's a huge roll of the dice when the Boeing design team, led by engineer Joe Sutter, go back to Pan Am many months into the process and let them know that their new jet is not going to be a double-decker. In working through the design, a double-deck fuselage proves to be too narrow and cramped and creates other design problems elsewhere in the airframe. There are safety concerns with regards to evacuation. That second deck is pretty high up there on the wooden mock-up that they build, and there's no real safe way to roll out emergency slides from that height. And cargo capacity is severely limited by the double-decker layout. The Boeing team keeps hammering on it, trying to make it work. It's what the client wants. It's the wave of the future. But Sutter and a couple of his designers decide to go back to the drawing board and work up a single-deck design that can still carry the 450-plus passengers per Pan Am's requirements. This single-deck layout is 20 feet wide. With 2 aisles, it's spacious, and it makes you feel like you're someplace, rather than in an aluminum tube. And the cargo space, don't get me started on the cargo space. There's plenty of it. In fact, Sutter's team designs 2 747s at the same time. The passenger version for Pan Am and other customers, and a cargo variant for long-haul cargo carriers. For this version, they design a nose cone that flips up to open. In order to accommodate this action, designers place the cockpit on top of the fuselage rather than at the front of it. And so the cockpit isn't just sticking up like a bump on a log. They extend it back 20 or 30 feet, adding a small upper deck and giving the 747 its distinct hump shape. Designers assume the upper deck will be used as a crew lounge. Pan Am, however, sees dollar signs up there and instead chooses to use it as an additional passenger compartment. Boeing will later produce many more variants on the 747, other than just passenger and cargo versions. There's the Combi, with passenger seating in the front of the main deck and cargo in the rear, for airlines with long routes but small passenger volumes. The 747 SR short range for airlines with short routes and large passenger volumes. The 747X stretch carrying larger volumes over long routes. The LCF Dreamlifter, an absolutely ludicrous-looking plane that can carry an absolutely ludicrous amount of cargo. And a whole mess of other variants. Whatever need you can imagine, they make a version of the 747 for that. The 747 is like the aviation equivalent of apps. It should be noted, though, that the 747 and all its initial variants are designed in the days before computers are used for this kind of thing. It's all drawn or mocked up by hand. And Joe Sutter has, at this point in the 747's development, upwards of 4,000 engineers under him, each working on minute details of the overall design. And when he's pressured to move up his estimated time to delivery, he tells Boeing he'll need another 1,100 engineers to make that happen, a staffing increase that Boeing doesn't want to spend the money on. This is a massive, massive undertaking, designing the 747 and building the prototype, let alone building the world's largest factory in which to build the world's largest airplane. Boeing builds the largest building by volume ever built in Everett, Washington, to build the 747. The factory floor space covers almost 100 acres. All of this happens within a span of 4 years, from the initial kernel of an idea to delivery of a completed and fully flight-tested commercial airliner. And when I say that Boeing didn't want to spend money on additional engineers, that's because in the 1960s, the 747 is aviation's bastard stepchild. The 747 plays second fiddle to the project that the company considers to be the real wave of the future. The project Boeing is sinking the majority of its R&D funds into, that the U.S. government is supporting to the tune of $500 million, and that is the 2707, the SST, supersonic transport. You've never seen one in the sky, because after throwing all of their top designers at the SST and hundreds of millions of dollars, Boeing and all the other manufacturers around the world who chase this monkey realized that the cost of the fuel needed to power supersonic commercial passenger travel is cost prohibitive. In fact, the only supersonic jet to make it into the sky from that race to the sound barrier is the Concorde, and there are only 14 of those that ever make it into commercial service, as opposed to the more than 1,500 747s that are put into service to date, carrying 5 times as many passengers as the Concorde for the same cost of fuel. Joe Sutter may not have gotten engineers that Boeing deems the best and brightest to work on the 747 project. Nonetheless, he brings the best out of his team of engineers who, by the time the first 747 rolls out on this day in 1968, have earned the nickname The Incredibles for designing and building one of the most successful commercial jet airliners ever. The Boeing 747 rolls out of the Everett factory for the first time on this day in 1968. 5 months later, it takes to the skies for its maiden voyage and has been aloft almost every hour of every day since. The 747 factory in Everett, Washington also begins running tours of the facility on this day. If you find yourself up in that neck of the woods, go check it out and tell them I sent you. And they'll say, Dave who? And you'll say, you know, the podcast. And they'll say, what? And you'll say, never mind. There are 92 days left in the year. On This Day is produced by me, Dave Schultz. Thank you very much for listening. Born on this day in 1924, author Truman Capote, an American original and pioneer of the true crime genre. He referred to his most famous book as a non-fiction novel. In Cold Blood is one of my favorite books. I still have my mom's first edition that I read as a youngster. So if you're still listening, that explains it. Talk to you tomorrow.